This video is going to be all about upgrading tires and wheels on a Jeep Gladiator. I'm going to discuss 37s versus 38s. We're going to talk about wheel backspacing and offset and why it's so important, and some of the future mods this thing's going to see. All right, let's get to it. Given the Gladiator has such a long wheelbase, it benefits greatly from moving up to a larger tire for trail riding, while the Rubicon version has no trouble accommodating a 35-inch tall tire in stock form. For those looking to get more off-road performance, a 37 or 38-inch tall tire is a great option. Here are a few things to consider, however, before moving up to a 37 or a 38. You'll need a suspension lift to properly cycle the tires off-road. How much depends on your willingness to either modify the flares or limit the suspension's up travel. Regearing the differentials is also highly recommended for on and off-road performance. Most 37-inch tall tires that are true to size will not fit in the stock spare tire location, so you'll need to come up with a good spare tire mounting solution. Lastly, moving up to a 37 or a 38 puts you at the top end of what we found the factory axles can handle off-road. So this may be an area that you'll eventually need to either upgrade or repair. To get a better apples to apples comparison between a 37 and a 38, I'm going to focus on two of the more prominent tires in this segment, the 37 by 1250 R17 Nitto Trail Grappler and the 38 by 1350 R17 Nitto Trail Grappler. As I'm recording this, the 38 is roughly $40 more per tire than the 37. Both are fit with a Load Range D 8-ply sidewall, but the 37 does offer 330 pounds more of load capacity over the 38. To me, one of the biggest selling points of the 38 is that it's only a touch over 2 pounds heavier than the 37. To put in perspective just how big of a deal that small increase is, the move from a 35-inch trail grappler to a 37 is about 14 pounds per tire. Now, 1250 versus 1350, not going to be that big of a difference. I actually like the 1350 a little bit more. I feel like when you pair it with either 17 by 8.5 or 17 by 9, it really protects the wheel, keeps it tucked in nice. That I am a big fan of. That being said, there is a lot to consider when moving up to a tire like this when it comes to the wheel. So let's get into that now. Moving to a tire as large as a 37 or 38 will require you to either add wheel spacers to your existing factory wheels or change to an aftermarket wheel set. Wheel style aside, the two most important things to consider when purchasing a new wheel have to do with offset and backspacing. Offset is represented by a positive, negative, or 0 millimeter measurement. The thing to understand here is that wheels with negative offset push the wheel further away from the vehicle. A low positive number, or 0, means that it will stay closer to the vehicle and under the flare more. Backspacing, on the other hand, is measured in inches and is a little less confusing to decipher. The lower the backspacing number, the further away from the vehicle the wheel will sit. The biggest benefit to having high numerical backspacing, and the reason that you see the Jeep come from the factory with high numerical backspacing, is it makes your scrub radius better. Think of this as your tire and wheel and this is your axle, and essentially it's pretty much covering the ball joints from the factory, and as you drive down the road it's pivoting on them very easily. The further you move this tire and wheel away from the ball joints, you're changing this sort of scrub radius, and that is going to accelerate wear on your front end components, and it can also make the steering feel a little sluggish and sometimes wandery. So what do you do? How do you balance it? Well, in my experience, if you're going to run something as big as, let's say, a 38 1350, you need anywhere between 4.5 and 5 inches of backspacing to properly clear things like your lower control arms and other suspension components. The wheel I'm using comes from Method Race Wheels and is a 701 bead grip wheel in a matte black finish. The thing that drew me to this wheel wasn't just that it had the right 4 3/4 inches of backspacing that I was looking for, but I was very captivated by the patented bead grip technology. The idea here is you have something that gives you more gripping power on the inner and outer bead of the tire. So when you're down at those low off-road pressures, you have less of a chance of the tire debeading. It's also worth mentioning that this hub-centric wheel has its valve stem inset inside of the wheel a good bit, keeping it out of harm's way on the trail. Now, I had this tire and wheel package mounted and balanced at my local off-road shop, Low Range 4x4, where it took surprisingly little weight for them to balance. So let's talk about tire clearance and lift height. Now, this Jeep, as you see it, has a 1-inch front TerraFlex spacer with a 1-inch front bump stop, and in the back, it's just a Daystar 3/4 inch spacer. That's it. And yes, it does clear the 38s enough where you can drive this thing daily, go slay them all, and nothing's going to be a problem there. However, I knew as soon as this thing started to flex off-road, I'd get into the plastic fender liner pretty heavily. Actually wanted to test this a little bit more controlled, so I put it up on the forklift at low range and went around, made sure that it was completely collapsed on the bump stop, and to see what was going to hit. Up front, like I figured, it was all into the inner liner of the fender flare, putting a lot of pressure on it. In the rear, same thing, even though this high numerical backspacing really keeps it tucked nicely underneath the wheel well, you're still going to get an issue with it contacting. While it does clear the front bumper at ride height, I found as soon as I went off-road and turned, I was getting into the backside of the front bumper pretty heavily. It does, however, clear the lower control arms without issue, so that's fine. It also clears the stock Rubicon sliders without a problem as well. For me, this was more, I wanted to see how it would look and how it would work with this sort of setup. I do have a suspension coming for this thing, and that's going to free up some room and let this thing properly cycle. That'll be coming in a future video, so stay tuned for that. Now, I knew my spare wasn't going to fit in the factory spare tire location, so my options are basically to either lay it down in the bed or stand it up somehow and ratchet it down. Now, I have this Best Top Super Top for Trucks 2 bed cover, and that actually gives me enough room to stand this thing up vertically, which opens up the bed quite nicely. More often than not, I probably won't even have this thing back here. It'll just be sitting in storage until I'm going to go on some longer adventures. Now, in terms of overall drivability, it's really not that big of a difference between the 35s and the 38s. I'm running about 32 PSI, very comfortable with this air pressure. I don't get a lot of weird wobble or pull out of the front end, so I don't really have any issues there. I'm not seeing 8th gear, which is not a surprise. I've got the factory V6 with the 8-speed automatic, which is a really good combo in my opinion, and even with just having 410 differential gears, it's usable. Now, on the interstate, if it's any sort of headwind, you're basically going to stay in 6th gear, but it's still going to have no problem keeping you at highway speeds. In town, your 45 and 55 mile an hour zones, you know, it's fine. I'm usually staying in 7th gear, has no issues there. Averaging around 14.5 to 15 miles per gallon, which is kind of surprising, and that's really more in-town fuel economy. On the interstate is really where it drops down. Once you get over 70, it's between 12.5 and 13.5 miles per gallon. So, you know, I figured that would be the case. I'm really happy with how soft this tire feels. The sidewall actually feels like it's very compliant, very smooth riding, so you know, don't have any complaints there. Hopefully that answers some questions if you're thinking about moving up tires and wheels, at least to a 38 on the Gladiator platform. I definitely have a few more mods to do to this thing to get it where I want it now. If you have any questions for me, feel free to drop them in the comments. If you want to see some of the behind the scenes stuff of what's going on with this build, you can check me out on Instagram at Ali Mansour Editor. And until next time, I appreciate you guys watching. Take care. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider subscribing to the Driving Line channel. Our goal is to excite, entertain, and educate you on all things automotive. So if you want to come be part of our journey, please hit that subscribe button, and we hope to see you on the next video. Take care.